Hi, I'm Shannon Whiteside, the program director of the Alveary. This is the 8th year of the Alveary, and we are so excited to give you a preview of some of the books we'll be reading for the 23-24 school year. If you want to learn more about the Alveary, you can find more information by downloading the View book, which is linked in the video description below. The View book also contains a free term of picture study lessons with our updated lesson plan format. In this video, I will be talking about Form 2, which is 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So let's get started. Let's start with Bible. For Bible, we are reading some Old Testament narratives, but a lot of the time we are reading the Psalms. That might seem a little odd for 4th through 6th graders, but I found a wonderful resource written for this age range that guides them through the Psalms and how Psalms can be used as prayers to God. It is called Wonderful Ancient Psalms Ever New. For the Old Testament, as the students read through Matthew, we have this great teacher resource called Bible Storybook Handbook. It was actually written by a professor of mine who now teaches at Wheaton College. Sometimes it's hard to know what the main idea of a narrative is, and we don't want to lead our students astray. So this book helps us understand the biblical context and mistakes to avoid when reading a certain passage. This is something you can read beforehand and share excerpts with your students as you see fit. This year, we will also incorporate missionary biographies as part of our Bible time. The 3 biographies that the students will be reading come from this time period. There's Gladys Allward, the little woman, about a missionary to China. There's God's Smuggler by Brother Andrew, who smuggled in Bibles behind the Iron Curtain, and Mother Teresa, who helped the poor in India. In Citizenship, students in 4th grade will be reading stories from the history of Rome that will give them a foundation for Plutarch, which begins in 5th grade. And when they get to Plutarch, the 5th grade and up will be reading from Ann White's The Plutarch Project, Volume 1, the revised edition, and they will be reading 2 lives, Philopoemen and Titus Flaminius. In our lesson plans this year, we are providing some more guidance for teaching Plutarch. We don't want you to miss the subject that Mason esteems so highly. She stated in her book, School Education, perhaps nothing outside of the Bible has the educational value of Plutarch's lives. Let's talk about English. We are continuing on with the Michael Clay Thompson books for grammar and composition. We really like the way he talks about the ideas of language and the importance of knowing the parts of a sentence, not just to know them, but because it allows us to communicate well. He does a really good job of tying it all together. This is a subject that should be done with your students so you can discuss the ideas. And this year, we are also going to be providing copywork and dictation passages that come from the terms books. We will be providing a packet for each grade that will have the passages written out. We hope this will be a helpful addition. You are always free to find your own as well. 4th grade begins with Grammar Island and Practice Island. 5th grade works on composition with Sentence Island, while they will finish up Practice Island. And 6th grade uses Grammar Town and Practice Town. Now let's talk about geography. I am very excited about geography for next year. We are changing things up a little. All across the grades in geography, there are various strands we want to cover. There's physical geography, historical geography, regional geography, and cartography, or the study of maps. Our geography for 4th through 8th is also based on the historical time period. We will read about adventurers who reached historic firsts, as well as places that were significant during that time period. 4th through 6th grade will be reading the same books. One of the books that they will read is called Onward, a photobiography of African-American polar explorer Matthew Henson. Most people have heard of his partner, Robert Perry, but Matthew Henson did not get the accolades he deserved until many years later because he was African American. Another book they are reading is called Bandula, The Great Elephant Rescue. With wonderful illustrations and interesting text, this book tells how elephants were instrumental in helping refugees leave Burma, present-day Myanmar, and travel to India during World War II. It's a great way to explore the culture and geographical features of these parts of Asia. Let's talk about history. In the Alveary, there's a 4-year rotation for history. Everyone from second grade and older is in the same time period. The historical period we will be studying for the 23-24 school year is 1900 to present. Our artists and composers and poets will be from those periods. We're excited to be studying a living artist, Erin Hansen, and looking at her artwork. For history, we are going to continue to read Heart and Soul. We will read a couple chapters per term. This is a book written in the voice of an old African-American grandmother, just telling about her experiences through life. It's just a great way to get an African-American's perspective on different historical events. And another book that we will be reading for one of the terms for history is called Fighting for the Forest. Now, I think this is a great book because there's so many themes woven throughout it. It tells the story of the Civilian Conservation Corps created during the Depression era to bring jobs to many men to preserve our national parks. So through their journeys, you get a better understanding of this era of history and think about the government's role in the economy and job creation. It's just a great read. When we learn about World War II, we will be reading Seen and Unseen, which is a graphic novel showing the experience and perspective of 3 photographers who documented the Japanese-American incarceration. This is an interesting way of looking at that painful time of history. For world history, students will be reading Stories of the Nations as a spine, as well as many other supplemental books. And one of the books I want to tell you about that we'll be reading that will give us more insight into World War II is a very fun read called The Journey That Saved Curious George. Now, who doesn't love Curious George? This is a true story about Hans and Margaret Ray, telling about their escape from their home in Paris as the German army was closing in during the war. And as they fled on their bicycles, they held sketches of the book that would become Curious George. I think this is just a great, engaging way to talk about all these events. And definitely, children will be happy to know that Curious George survived. For the Canadian students, they will read The Story of Canada by Lunn, as well as selections from a book called Clewick by Emily Carr, who was a painter. The 5th through 12th graders will also be studying ancient history. And next year, our focus will be on 350 to 800 AD, which is known as late antiquity. It's the time beginning with the fall of Rome through the crowning of Charlemagne. The 5th and 6th graders will be reading a book called The Castle with Many Rooms. They will begin the reading of this and then finish it the following year. They will also be reading some other books as well. And one of those is Augustine of Hippo. It's a great biography showing about this, telling about this important man's life and his contribution to Christianity. And it all takes place during the fall of Rome. So we get a glimpse of that context as well. Let's talk about literature. In 4th grade, they read selections from Norse mythology from the book In the Days of Giants, and that'll be read for 2 terms. 5th and 6th grade read world mythology from Bulfinch, Age of Fable, which will be read for 1 term. Mason had her students read mythology and thought it was an important part of the curriculum. It helps us understand other cultures and times and their worldviews and beliefs. I don't think it takes away from what we believe is truth about the origins of life and the meaning of life. In fact, I think these myths make the truth of the Bible shine brighter. In Shakespeare, which begins in 4th grade, they'll be reading A Midsummer Night's Dream, Merchant in Venice, and Coriolanus. Mason had a select number of plays that she used in her program, and students would reread the plays as they got older. So if you feel like your students may have already read one of these plays, feel free to read it again. This time around, they will catch more of the language and ideas. We will also be providing more guidance with Shakespeare this year in our lesson plans, so it doesn't seem so intimidating if you are new to it. For poetry, 4th and 5th will use the same books as Form 1, which is called the 20th Century Children's Poetry Treasury, which is a great collection of modern poems. The 6th graders will be reading a book called The Death of a Hat, A Brief History of Poetry in 50 Objects. This is a fun read where the author takes the readers on an interesting poetry journey from the Middle Ages to present by giving us poems written about everyday objects. It's just a fun way to explore poetry. 6th graders will also have some additional poetry reading from some modern poets, such as Frost, Hughes, and Paul Fleischman. Now let's look at some of the novels that we'll be reading next school year. We wanted to find a mix of classic and newer models. We also wanted to include diverse perspectives and characters. So everything we read will be written from 1900 to present. I will share some of the readings that will be done. 5th and 6th grade will be reading Code Talker, which is a historical fiction book about a Navajo boy who becomes a code talker, which is a crucial part of World War II in helping the U.S. to win the war. So this is a really interesting read. They will also be reading The Winged Watchman. This is a great story about a family in the Netherlands when Germany had occupied their country. There's a lot of suspense and spiritual insight in this book. Your kids will really enjoy it. 5th and 6th grade will also be reading the classic Where the Red Fern Grows, about a boy and his coon dogs. That one always brings tears to my eyes. And a more modern read will be Esperanza Rising. This was written in 2001 and has won many awards. It depicts the life of a privileged girl from Mexico who is forced to flee to California with her mom. And this happens during the Great Depression era. So it's an interesting story of adversity and triumph. The 4th graders will also read Sounder. And this is also a story about a boy and his coon dog, but this is about an African-American boy and a sharecropper family. So it's set in that era and helps us to see their life a little more clearly. The last thing we want to tell you about is science. So I will let Danielle tell you all about that.
Hi there, Danielle here to introduce you to some of our new science books for this year for Form 2. As some of you know, we conducted a survey earlier in the year to understand what kind of support you need in science. And so there are a number of updates that we're making this year to bring in some of your teacher training and smooth out your transitions between forms and make sure that all of the building of knowledge and experience is appropriate for each grade, and you don't need to necessarily customize the generalized content for the form for each of your students. So one of the things you'll notice is that lore is, we want you to share this as a subject that is being shared across your group in your community, right? It's part of your culture building that you're doing. And ultimately, these stories, we want them to become part of the habits that the kids are going to take with them into adulthood. So you're going to see 3 options on your program this year for lore. The first one being a story called That Quail Robert. This is a story about a family who rescued an abandoned egg in the woods, and they brought it home thinking that it was just this beautiful nature find for them to enjoy on their kitchen counter. And then the egg hatched and they got to raise this sweet little bird, and he became part of their family. So that's a story that's all about their journey with that little bird. The second book you'll see in your program for lore is called Bell's Journey. Bell's Journey was written by an osprey scientist in the Northeast, and he is telling us the story of one of his osprey that he tagged as a very young bird, and all of the places that she's been, her first flight, her first hunt, all of these things that he was able to discover about her and that he's learned about osprey through his research through this story. The third book that you see on your program this year for lore as a selection is called The Hay Meadow by Gary Paulson. Gary Paulson is the author that wrote Hatchet that many of us are familiar with. But The Hay Meadow is a story about a little boy. I think he's about 11, so not too little. But his grandfather invited him to come and take care of his 6,000 sheep herd in the meadow for a summer. So he was out there in the meadow all summer with these sheep, taking care of them. And this is a story about all of the things that he finds out about himself and about nature, all steeped in that rich natural context that Gary Paulson is so well known for. So if you have a classroom of, say, fourth graders or your fifth grader is your oldest homeschooler, and you have, a bunch of youngsters, you might want to just be reading these for 15 minutes over lunch, or maybe as part of your morning basket. Or maybe you have a cottage school and you've got forms 2 and 3 together. You might decide to choose one of these and read it for 30 minutes. So we're giving you a little bit of choice and some flexibility and some options there to really make this a place where these stories are shared and they become part of your community and culture. There's a lot going on developmentally in Form 2. And so you're going to see in both general science and natural history that we're trying to support that development in different but very important ways. Okay, some of the kids are going to find some aspects of that more natural or more challenging, and it might not be different than, another student. They'll find different aspects more natural or more challenging, and that's okay, because we all are going to find natural resonance at times, and then places where we get to lean into the challenge. So in Form 2 this year, your general science is grade leveled. The topics that we scheduled for you were chosen on a number of things that I wanted to explain to you and share with you. We looked at the national science standards, okay, and we chose topics based on what the scientists are actually doing in the students' neighborhood, so to speak. That was something that was really important to Mason, that the kids could see what science is going on in the world around them. They're becoming much more aware of that at this grade level. We took into consideration reading level, and we took into consideration the conceptual challenge, because kids that are in 6th grade are really ready to think about things that 4th graders aren't quite ready for yet. And they're ready for things that are both smaller and bigger than they were in Form 1. So we took all of those things into consideration. Your first book for grade 4 that I wanted to share with you is a book called To Fly. This is a book about the Wright brothers. And so the students in grade 4 are going to be reading about the Wright brothers and learning in their lab books about simple machines. They're going to be learning to collect data. They're going to be learning to build bar graphs and how to use their notebook. And those new lab books, by the way, are completely new for you. We have made them and built them to go along with your book schedule. They're totally comprehensive and progressive in the way that they build the skills and the conceptual knowledge for each grade through the form. They provide all of the instruction and materials lists and guidance that those students need to build all of those skills and the knowledge. Whenever the students move up from grade 4 into grade 5, we have books like Eye of the Storm on their schedule. Eye of the Storm is a book about meteorology. They've got other books in there about earth science and the solar system. And these books, again, continue to build that conceptual knowledge. They're moving on from bar graphs in grade 5, for example, and using their data to build line graphs and scatter plots. And then by the time they get into 6th grade, we've given them some books that actually used to be in with our 7th graders, but we've spread them out a little bit and wanted to share them with our 6th graders since they're able to do more than the 4th graders are. This is Breakthrough. This is one of my favorite authors wrote this book. Jim Murphy is just great. He is absolutely a master at weaving the facts into the human story. And so in Breakthrough, the kids get to read about the work of Vivian Thomas and his colleagues as they developed the surgical procedures that were able to save babies who have a certain kind of heart defect. Okay, so through this book, they're building on the conceptual knowledge that they learned in the previous grades. We're introducing new concepts like using models, which is a really important theme in science as they get older. They're building on the graphing that they did and starting to use coordinate systems. And we're starting to introduce them to that historical context and the role that that human story plays in the development of science. In natural history, our Form 2 kids start expanding the scope of the creatures, both in breadth and depth, that they're able to kind of take notice of and see in the world around them. And they're building on this increasingly complex idea of ecosystem. This will actually be going on very slowly for a number of years. And they're learning how to generalize and group these creatures and building the foundations for classification. Our 4th graders, for example, will be reading Life on Surtsey. Life on Surtsey is, this is another one of my favorite authors. You guys get all my favorite authors. This is a story about the scientists that are following the primary succession, right, the starting of new life that is occurring on this volcanic island off the coast of Iceland. And they are learning something different about ecosystem that they do when they read it in this book than they might, for example, in a book like A World in a Drop of Water, right, where they're looking at specifically microscopic life that might be in the pond in their backyard. Then in 5th grade, they get to dig into some botany and start to think about the important role that plants play in all of this big picture of ecosystem. And we're trying something fun with first term that I wanted to share with you guys. This book is called Miss Ladybird's Wildflowers. And this is a story about Lady Bird Johnson and her work as a citizen scientist to educate and conserve our nations and our continents, really, wildflowers all across the continent. I did not know any of this before I read this book, and so that was just fascinating and a wonderful story to inspire the kids. This is a picture book, though, so we paired this up with another lovely book called Nature All Around Plants. And I really like this one because it adds to some of the scientific knowledge that you can't cover in a picture book, but it also keeps that by the way feel to it. And the diagrams and the pictures in this book are both beautifully done and really helpful and informative as well. So it really struck a great balance to add to Miss Ladybird. The 6th graders are using this book called Tracking Trash. This is one of my son's favorites. This is a book about a scientist who, he's an oceanographer, and the ocean is so big, and he was struggling with this idea about how to learn more about the ocean. And then he realized that actually all of the trash that finds its way to the ocean, we could put it to good use and could use that to learn more about the ocean as we track that trash. So this is another fun one that the 6th graders will get to have. We do have those natural history books assigned by grade, but they could be moved around a little bit and a bit more flexibly than the general science could for the purposes of combining students. And in fact, I really highly encourage you to move those around to accommodate your location and your season and any field trips you might have. So if you might have the opportunity to go to the beach or go to an aquarium, you might want to move some books around so that you can see those. Or if you, maybe the wildflower book is scheduled in term 1, but maybe it'd be better for you to do it in term 3. That's fine. Go ahead and take advantage of what your place is and use those books the way they work best for you.